Welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I think, we've had some heavy topics lately on this podcast, from margins being eaten away in dental practices and what's going on with team members. And so I wanted to lighten it up a little bit today and talk about some some issues that I've had in my practice, because I think it's always fun to experience somebody else's mistakes, whiffs, shanks, if you will. So today we're going to be talking about some of the things over the course of my career where I missed the target, where I've had some problems in my practice. I think this really came about because I've been traveling a lot and talking with a lot of people, not who aren't dentists, who are. I went to the endemic meeting, where very interesting meeting where we talk about electronic data exchange, a lot of insurance providers and software vendors, and I was the only dentist, frankly, which I think is problematic for the industry. I think we need to get more involved as dentists in how the industry works, and so hopefully I can help bring some of that knowledge to the podcast. Over the coming weeks we'll be talking about how we can help change our industry for the better, particularly when it comes to more I love to play today, which is in the realm of technology and standard development and patient advocacy. But I digress. Today is about my failures, about uh, what I've done wrong. And I think, again, this came about because I was talking to non dentists who ask me the same question every single time when they find out what I'm doing in the industry. They say, "Do you still see patients?" To which I say, sometimes. I do see patients still, but very irregularly scheduled because I am busy doing a lot of other things. I saw patients at a very, very, very high level for over 21 years, and I loved it. I still love seeing patients. I just feel like the dentists in my practice are phenomenal dentists. I'm honored that they're practicing, that I practiced with them, and now they're taking great care of our patients. And I'm moving on to do sort of more technology and industry wide things. But it made me really reflect back on my career when everybody was asking me this. And one of the tenets we have here at Upgrade Dental is success or learning. This means that there's only one way to fail. The only way you fail is to not learn from your mistakes. So we either succeed or we learn, because we don't do it a second time if we fail, right? So that's one of our tenants here. And I was thinking about that in conjunction with not really seeing patients very frequently anymore. And I was thinking about what are the learning things that I had. And I would say that each one of these fall squarely into the category that this podcast is focused on, which is putting patients first, the patient experience. Because if I was the patient in my chair during these, I would be thinking, does this guy know what the hell he's doing? Which I did, but we all, after 21 years of seeing a high volume of patients, sometimes we'll miss something. We'll miss the mark. We'll have a bad day, if you will. Now, I'm not talking about my biggest failures. I think really the biggest failure that I can think of is I did break an endophile off in a tooth, and that was just sort of really bad. And I think if you do enough endo, particularly before the days of nickel titanium files, you're eventually going to break a file in a tooth. And that happened once in my career. Also, I have to mention that each one of these patients, and including that patient with the endo file, really are amazingly nice human beings. I really got that lucky horseshoe over me during my entire career, where when I had a negative experience, I can't even think of when I did something, when I made a mistake, when I missed something, or when something went wrong, where it wasn't on a phenomenal person. So God help me if this had happened the other way, where where one of these things had happened on somebody who wasn't so understanding. But luckily that didn't happen. So here we are with Brian's three biggest mistakes I can think of today that negatively affected my patients. So number one goes back to my pre CAD cam of full arch imaging using a CAD cam machine in dentistry. It goes back to the days of taking polyvinyl siloxane impressions, with many of you are doing today. I was doing a bridge on the lower right, and I neglected to look and see what's going on the left side? And I locked the impression in the patient's mouth because there was a bridge with about a centimeter. I mean, it wasn't a centimeter, but it was a lot of space between the pontic and the gingiva. Put the impression in there, and I'm just waiting, and then wait for it to get nice and hard, and then go to take it out, and I'm like, huh, this is a problem. Oh, you know what makes it worse? This is a metal tray locked in the patient's mouth, and they're drooling all over the place. I look at the radiograph to see what's going on, and then I noticed that pontic space, and I went, well, guess who shanked this one? This guy. So that proceeded with the next 40 minutes of me cutting pieces of this metal tray out to retract this impression from this poor lady. Fun times where I was just sweating. It was hot. I was sweating 40 minutes. And of course, I had patients to go see and do. I had to actually reschedule two patients because of this one. Yeah, that was not fun. And you know, the best part about it was then after I got this impression out, you know what had to happen? I had to take another one because I couldn't use the impression 40 minutes later. Like I said, luckily, this patient was completely forgiving. She was laughing about it. I don't know how. I would not have been as gracious as she was, I can tell you that. But just a little boxing wax under that bridge on the lower left, and the second one went very smoothly. But we've all been there, I think, with an experience like this that hopefully, or maybe hopefully, you can't identify with. But this one was a bad one. That was pretty bad. The second experience I had falls that I'm going to recount today of when I shanked it falls under the category where I probably had my most failures, and that is the category of oral surgery. I've talked about it before. There was a half my career, I would say, for probably the first decade of my practicing life. I did a lot of oral surgery and I was never good at it. Never was my skill set. I should have stopped way before I did. But this particular experience is from my second year out in practice when I just bought my first practice, which was an 800 square foot space, two operatories basically, and one tiny operatory where the hygienist was, and then I had two operative operatories, both which were designed in the 1970s. And this particular one had the mint green countertop, which was like a really hard laminate surface. And it went the entire length of the operatory. And then there were drawers underneath with all the tools. You know, from if you've ever looked at those wooden cabinets with like the crystal handles on the drawers, it was just like that. It was not very infection control safe. Everything was porous. But anyway, I digress. So there's a laminate surface, and I was doing a full mouth edentulation and giving somebody immediate dentures. Now, also, not one of my skill sets was making immediate dentures. And later on, if you've listened to, I have recounted this story before, but I did at one point turn to my assistant and say, if I ever say I'm going to do another immediate denture, slap me as hard as you can across the face because I am not the greatest at oral surgery and not the greatest at doing removable pros. So those two don't fall very high in my skill sets. So I've had most of my learning experiences were in those two categories, removable pros and oral surgery. And eventually I learned to not do both those things, which was, again, slow learner, took me a decade, but I got there. Anyway, this particular time, I was taking out a tooth, number 19 on this lady, and when I took the tooth out, there was a massive abscess on the tooth that was bloody, and I went to go put I had the cow horn forceps with number 19. Went to put it on the counter, hit the counter, popped open the forceps, and the tooth kept going, rolling crown to abscess, crown to abscess, crown to abscess, the entire length, about 4 feet down the countertop, leaving a little splotch of pus and blood along the way. Sorry if you're not a dentist, this is a gross one, but that was a big mistake that I had by not lifting my hand over the counter to place the tooth on the tray. And we've probably all dropped some things. That was the worst dropping of something in my operatory career. So that's my mistake number two. And number three is probably one of my most embarrassing. It's not as big, or it's not even, has nothing to do with dentistry, but I walked into a great patient, one of my favorite patients, frankly, in my entire career. I did a lot of work for her, and I walked in and she was wearing a lime green patient napkin. And I said to her, because when I walked in, this lady must have been coloring her hair, and not on purpose, but her care. I said, "Your hair matches your napkin." And she looked at me like this, like, what the hell are you talking about, Dr. Laskin? And that's because she didn't mean to have her hair match the napkin. And I think it must have been, maybe it was the light of the sun gleaming off the napkin that gave her hair this lime green glow. But it was one of those things where you can't back out of that comment, right? And so it really was one of those times that really had me focus carefully on what I say to patients going forward. So hopefully this recounting of some of my mistakes, some of my problems, some of my learning experiences in my, all of these were relatively early in my career. But uh but when I look back on my career, I've had many great moments, but I figured today we would recount some of my missteps. And so hopefully it was entertaining. Maybe you identify with one or two, hopefully not all three. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the Patient First podcast.